Hello, everybody. Welcome to The Truth Will Set You Free. This show is brought to you by TLBTV and the Liberty Beacon Project. Our guest today is Harriet Hodgson. I tried that name, Harriet. Did I do okay? Harriet is, to me, an amazing woman. She is a freelance writer. She has been on the internet for different articles, and she's written about bereavement, grief, Alzheimer's. She's done presentations where health facilities enjoy her performance. I call it performance, but she's seriously doing a job. And she is an amazing author. Now, she's been writing for over 36 years, but she has written over 35 books. So she's definitely an ordained author. How you doing today, Harriet?
I'm doing great, thank you.
That's wonderful. I find it interesting how people's destiny is revealed to them. And I also find it interesting that you figured it out very quickly what yours was. It's like you didn't have much choice.
No.
You want to share with people what your destiny ended up being?
Well, in addition to being a writer, which I think is part of my destiny, I was destined to be a caregiver. Not a paid caregiver, but a family caregiver. And most family caregivers work for free. And they do it lovingly, but it's not an easy job. We have our good days, we have our bad days. But I learned early on when my mother developed dementia that I had to take action. She had moved to Florida quite impulsively to be near a sister, and then shortly after that, the sister died, and she was lost. And she called me to tell me she was found wandering in a store looking for her car. And she said, the clerk told me cars are outside, not inside. And when I heard that, I thought, wow, I have to move her from Florida to my hometown of Rochester, Minnesota. And my husband and I did that. And together we were her family caregivers for 9 years. And
yeah.
And to be honest, I just didn't know how exhausted I was until she died. And it took me a year to regain my strength after that. And I thought life would calm down, and I kept writing. And then my elder daughter, the mother of my twin grandchildren, was killed on a snowy February night in a car crash. I should say from the injuries she sustained in a car crash. And surgeons operated on her for 20 hours. And as the lead surgeon said, we would fix something and then something else would fail. And when we found out she was brain dead, we made that terrible, terrible decision that no one wants to make. We pulled life support. She was an organ donor. And thanks to her generosity, 2 lives were saved and 2 people now see. And then again, I thought life would calm down, but in 2013, my husband's aorta dissected. And thankfully, we lived close to the hospital. And when we arrived in the ER, a nurse looked at me and mouthed the words, "just in time." And he was basically bleeding to death, and they kept pumping blood into him as fast as they could, but it wasn't enough, and he had 3 emergency surgeries, and during the last one, he suffered a spinal cord injury that paralyzed his legs. And ever since that night, when I drove him to the hospital, I have been his caregiver and advocate. And if you add up the years, that's 20. 20 years, because, I forgot to say, Linda, that my twin grandchildren's mother, our daughter, didn't just die, but their father died. a few months later. And so my husband and I were appointed their guardians and caregivers.
So that's 3 generations of
It's 3
caregiving.
generations, and I can tell you that I haven't been bored. No boredom here.
Wow. And you know, one of the things that you had mentioned when you was taking care of your mom, that you learned a different type of grief that you hadn't heard people talk about. Is it called anticipatory grief?
Anticipatory.
Yeah.
Yes.
Share
And
with us what that's
you
about.
know what's, well, first of all, what's interesting about it is that everyone goes through it. Sooner or later, at some time in your life, you are going to experience anticipatory grief. And it is a feeling of loss before a death or dreaded event occurs. And that dreaded event could be anything. Maybe your child was born with heart. Maybe you heard on the rumor mill that your job is going to be cut and the company is going to downsize you. That's a pleasant term for a disappointing experience, you know. So it comes to everyone's life. And I didn't know that I was going through this. And I met a church friend downtown, and she said, well, how are you? And she knew I was my mother's care. I'm stressed and anxious, and I don't know what's wrong with me. And she said, you're going through anticipatory grief, and it's very powerful. And after that, I researched anticipatory grief for years. In fact, I still research it. I write about it too.
Well, you pretty much said she probably was experiencing it also, your mom?
No, because I don't think she realized she had dementia. So if you don't know that, you're not going to experience the grief. Oddly enough, she forgot that her sister died. So she would say to me, well, I wonder what happened to Ada. And I would say, well, Ada died. And then her mourning would start all over again. And then it would slowly ebb. And then she would forget it. And then we would have the same experience. She remembered her husband died, but she didn't remember her sister died. So I don't think she had a sense of grief. It was primarily confusion.
Oh, okay. So you're saying it wasn't your mom per se, that you saying that somebody who may not have dementia, but you're their caregiver, they could be experiencing it. So it's not just a caregiver, right? That's what I'm trying to understand.
Well, and paid caregivers go through this too. They get attached to the patients. If you're a nurse or a physician, you get attached to the patient, and if their health fails or if they have a chronic illness and die, you know, and they perhaps can sense that, they go through anticipatory grief as well. It's hard, and that's why the term compassion fatigue came about, because you care so much and you have so much compassion that eventually you can become fatigued.
So basically, it
So
sounds like it's using the word anticipating. It's the anticipation. And then I remember you were saying sometimes you kind of felt guilty that you was anticipating it, like you didn't have faith that they could, you know, get better or live longer. So it's like mixed feelings with it.
well, it's mixed feelings, and I felt like there was a black cloud over my head all the time, you know. And the problem with people with dementia, when you're caring for a loved one, they can have good days and bad days. And I know one time my mother seemed to be doing well. I thought, gee, maybe I'm crazy. Maybe, you know, I'm the one with dementia. And of course I was not. And I said, well, Mom, do you want to go to the movies? And she said, sure. And I took her to the movies, and it was very loud, and she kept staring at the screen. And afterwards, when we walked out the door, she said, well, I don't know what that was all about. And then the next day, then her intelligence dropped again. So, you know, people with dementia can plateau for a while. They can go even along, and the caregivers and even professional ones think, gee, you know, maybe we misinterpreted things, but they didn't. And then if you have Alzheimer's or other forms of dementia, you know, then the mind fails a little bit more.
And I think one of the things, yeah, it was tough. I remember when you had mentioned, I think one of the most painful moments for you was when she didn't recognize you.
No, it was terrible. And, you know, even though my mother was in an assisted living community, I was still so involved in her care. I managed her finances. I made medical appointments. I made dental appointments. I drove her to appointments. We had an errand day. I took her out to lunch every Wednesday. Every Sunday, I had her for a gourmet dinner that I cooked. She was part of every family gathering. She was part of Thanksgiving. She was part of Christmas. And it was just tragic to see her fail. Fortunately, the lead nurse warned me and said, you know, your mom is starting to shut down. And she began refusing food. And then she began refusing liquids. And when they do that, you know the end is near. And so when I went to visit my mother, by then she was grunting. She was not making sentences anymore. And so she grunted loudly and tried to push me away. She didn't know who I was. And I think she thought I was a stranger and had, you know, the idea of harming her. And so with the nurse's comment in my mind, I made an extraordinarily painful decision. I decided that I wanted her to die in peace, not fearfully, not groaning and grunting and pushing me away. And so I didn't visit her anymore. And I stayed home and I cried and I grieved, and a day and a half later she died.
You made a good decision.
Well, I think it was a more peaceful ending to a wonderful life.
And she probably really appreciated it also. You know, I just recently learned that you're a school teacher.
Yes,
So,
yes.
Huh?
Well, I have a Bachelor of Science degree in early childhood education, and I have a Master of Arts degree in art education. And I started working on a PhD, but my husband is a physician. And we had a very busy life, and I got the lightning bolt message one day that we were going to have just one doctor in the family, not two. But interestingly, when we became guardians of our grandkids, one boy and one girl, twins, I never thought that I would draw upon that child development degree, but I did. And I did constantly, because my alma mater, Wheelock College in Boston, always put children first. That was the motto in everything you did, or everything we did, that the child came first. So it didn't matter that my grandkids were 15 years old when they moved in with us. Their love and welfare and safety came first. And that was a sacred mission for me. I realized that was my next mission, and it was sacred.
And you do such a great job in explaining what you have experienced. And I was wondering, when you took care of your mom, was you teaching at that time? Was you just so available for her, or did you just stop everything? How did that work into your life?
I taught for 12 years, and then I, during that time, started writing articles for educational journals, and the journals published them, and I thought, boy, this is fun, and look, there's my name on the page. So yeah. I finally made a decision that I would quit teaching, which I loved, and I would give writing a try. And that was the beginning. And now my 36th book is in production. And I write for 3 websites, including the Caregiver space. I have a lot of articles on there, nonprofit, very reliable. So I keep chugging along.
You know, when you took on that caregiving position in your life, your first person was your mom. Was there times when you felt that you were lacking in making the best decisions, or did it just come naturally to you?
I think it came pretty naturally. I think if you talk with professional/paid caregivers, they will tell you that there are people who have that personality, who have that nature, who really care. And I have a caregiving personality. And so that wasn't difficult for me. What was difficult is that the intelligent, funny, hilarious, funny, God-fearing mother of my childhood became angry, started stealing things from people in the assisted living community, started swearing, and for quite a while I, could get by saying, "Mom, I love you." And she would say, "I know you do. I know you do." And then one time I said to her, "Mom, I love you, and I'm doing my best." And she replied, "You may be doing your best, but it isn't good enough." And I remember that thinking, oh my goodness, I've tried so hard. But she was right, because my best was not good enough to make her young again. My best was not good enough to restore her IQ. My best was not good enough to make her happy. And I knew it was dementia talking, not the mother of my childhood.
So did you ever actually experience like heartache? I mean, where did you put your emotions during that time? Did you come up with a reality that really said you don't need to hurt this much, or what did you do?
I started writing about this. And one book that I started, it is called Smiling Through Your Tears, Anticipating Grief. And I had a hotshot New York City publisher at the time. And I worked on this book literally during my caregiving days with my mother. So I worked on it for 9 years. I revised the outline, worked on the manuscript. Finally, I sent a cover letter and the outline to my New York City publisher, and I waited for a reply. And no reply came. And 1 week went by, and 2 weeks, and 3 weeks. And so finally I called, and I talked with the acquisitions editor. And she said, well, yes, she had read my letter. Yes, she had read my outline. And she said, I don't get it. I just don't get it. And I realized from the sound of her voice that she was very young, and anticipatory grief had not come to her life yet. So she couldn't get it. And there was no way I could make her get it. And she said, but I have some advice for you. Why don't you get a medical co-author? And that will give the book more credibility. So I called a Mayo Clinic psychiatrist who lived in my, and she was eager to join in on the project. She vetted the book. She added her points. She wove them into the existing manuscript beautifully. We looked for a publisher. Many traditional publishers didn't want to touch a sad topic. So we turned to Amazon's publishing arm, Create Space, and it's on Amazon right now and has gotten wonderful reviews.
Well, you're definitely a writer. There's no doubt about that, because I enjoyed your book, that Caregiver Guide. and the
Yes.
affirmations that come with it. You definitely write in a way that, like I said, is very angelic.
Well,
But
thank you. So I have a whole series for family
yeah,
caregivers, the Family Caregivers Guide, affirmations for family caregivers, a journal for family caregivers, which is different from other journals. I use a finish the sentence approach. And then the last one is the Family Caregivers Cookbook.
right.
These recipes for busy family caregivers. And my 36th book is in production now. I gotta hold up the cover. I
Oh,
don't know if you can
yes.
see it.
Oh, I love it.
It's called So You're Raising Your Grandkids.
Oh, that's nice.
So that's coming in the spring.
Well, you have to let me know when it come out. I'd love to review it for you.
Oh, well, I will send you a review copy.
And
I'm
see
going to
what,
order it. They're the uncorrected copies. They may have a few errors in them, but I'm ordering those, and those will go out in January.
and so the caregiving continued. Like when you think about your husband, I mean, he was just living a wonderful life and, you know, walking and being normal. And I'm quite sure the responsibility level changed for you drastically. So how many years in between were?
Oh, it's all a blur. Really. I mean,
Oh,
I would recover basically from one caregiving experience and go back to my writing with energy, and then another caregiving experience would come up. One thing about him is that he is a retired physician, so he knows exactly what happened to him. And he was hospitalized a long time. I mean, he was in the hospital and in a nursing home for follow-up care for 8 months. So in that time, I had to move us out of a house that we lived in for more than 20 years, and I had to do it alone. And it was overwhelming. I mean, I kept looking at each room saying, how can I do this? Do I have the strength to do this? Meantime, he was in a nursing home, and I wanted him to have contact with family, so our grandkids visited him, and friends visited him, and family members. But I visited him 3 times a day, after or breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And I learned the names of all the caregivers on the floor. I learned the names of all the residents on the floor. I sat and talked with them. And then finally I thought, this place needs to be jazzed up a little bit. So I brought in flowers for the dining room tables. And he was there 6 months, and I brought in flowers for that amount of time. And then one time I brought in a bag of fortune cookies, and they were all individually wrapped. And I said, here, take a fortune. And they couldn't, the public health aspect, they couldn't get upset because every cookie was individually wrapped, but it brought some fun to the residents that were there. And they didn't know I brought in flowers. A few did, but I changed it, and the flowers changed the whole dining room. It was fascinating. So people who hadn't talked before would say, look at those yellow daffodils. What a beautiful color. It changed the dynamics.
wow. So when you took care of him, you learned a different form of caregiving, because I remember one of the things you said, you would feel guilty if you didn't come to every beck and call.
Yeah, that's hard. And I've had to learn again, you have to relearn that you have to practice self-care, because you can't take care of anyone else unless you take care of yourself. So that means that I am in bed at 10 o'clock. Now, when I get up, it varies, and I hate to admit this, but I write in my sleep. So yeah, don't tell anybody. So along about 3 o'clock, my brain reviews what I wrote the previous day. And then I will get a message. For example, there's an error in the first paragraph on page 33. Well, if I have that kind of message from my subconscious, pretty soon I'm awake. So I may be at the computer making that correction at 4 in the morning or 4:30. So that's not enough sleep. So sometimes I take a nap in the afternoon.
So, when you talk about your grandchildren, would you say you were more caregiving than being a parent?
Well, I was a caregiver and I was a grandmother. I was doing what grandparents do. And I wanted them to know that I was not a substitute parent. I wasn't a substitute mother. My husband wasn't a substitute father. They had loving parents. And I didn't want them to get angry and think, oh, they're trying to take away my parents or even my memory of my parents. And so I told them that we will always be your grandparents. And I think they understood that. And I think the results show the understanding because my husband comes from a medical family. His father was a physician. His brother is a physician. Our niece is a surgeon. And now our grandson is the third generation, soon to be doctor at the Mayo Clinic School of Medicine in Rochester, Minnesota. Both of the kids graduated with honors, high honors, and Phi Beta Kappa. Our granddaughter works for the South, also an independent photographer. And she does a wonderful job, takes wonderful photos. And they have their own lives now, but we are still connected. I think we will always be connected.
So basically, you're just being a wife.
Being a wife and a grandmother. And they got to know us very well. I remember we were having a discussion at the dinner table, and I heard my granddaughter say to her brother, "Don't tell Grandma, she'll go ballistic." Well, wow. Maybe they're right.
And one of the things I learned with your writing too, you introduce us to a lot of things to be aware of. And one of the things you had mentioned was be aware of possible symptoms of institutionalization.
Yes, that's interesting. And my husband had that a little bit. And it happens when a person is hospitalized for a long time. And what happens is they lose contact with the outside world, and their hospital room, whether it's a shared room or an individual room, becomes their world. And they are so dependent on all the caregivers and the nurses and the doctors and the people who come in to clean the room that often they become passive. So if someone asks them a question, they'll say, "Oh, well, okay," or "maybe," or, and that happened to my husband a little bit, and he had always been a decisive person. So I would finally say, well, maybe isn't really an answer. You have to tell me yes or no. What is your answer? But once he got, he was in the ICU, the intensive care unit, for several months. Now, once he got out of there and to a nursing home, he socialized more. And he got out of his room and saw people at meals. He had a little bit of physical therapy. And so that institutionalization began to fade and is gone now.
And I also like how you said that one of the things people tend to miss as a caregiver is not realizing that the patient or the person that you're tending to needs to have purpose. It's not just the caregiver who needs purpose in their life.
Yeah, well, maybe the purpose is just surviving, but it can be that you're going to try as hard as you can in therapy, for example. I know after my husband had been home a year, and I built a wheelchair accessible townhome for us. But after he had been home for a year, he suddenly received a letter, and it said, well, your first physical therapy session is scheduled for, whatever the date. And I thought, well, what can a therapist do if he's been sedentary for a year? Well, oh, thou of little faith, because they got my husband stand and pivot. Then they put him up on a machine called the zero gravity machine. They put a harness on him, lifted him up, helped him start to walk. They nudged his legs, and pretty soon he took a few steps, and then within a couple of weeks he was halfway down the gym. A few more weeks he walked the whole distance, and then they said, now we're going to try a walker, and I almost fainted. I thought, well, I don't think that's going to work. And he tried that, and he started to take a few steps, and then they said, now see how far you can go down this hallway. And he took 85 steps, and the therapist was astonished and turned to us and said, Merry Christmas.
Oh, wow. And then another thing I liked about what you was emphasizing for us to understand is to not be so hard on ourselves. People tend to do that because, they're tired and they don't feel like, things is going the way they feel like things should go. But you say, like, take care of that spiritual part of yourself.
I think that's true. And, have often said to my husband, I need quiet time in each day. And I try to set aside that time. At least a half an hour where there's silence. I don't want a television on. I don't want a radio on. I want to sit quietly and meditate or read. Lately, I've been reading the poetry of John O'Donoghue, an Irish poet, and he was a priest. And his book is To Bless the Space Between Us. And it's just lovely. It's just absolutely lovely. And one of my favorite poems is To Come Home to Yourself. And that's what I'm doing every day with my quiet time. I'm coming home to myself and who I am and my mission.
Your mission?
Yeah.
What's your mission?
Is still to be pardon me?
What's your mission?
I didn't hear that.
What is your mission?
My mission is to continue. It's to be a good caregiver and to continue writing books that help other people.
I found it interesting that after I had read your book, I told you I had a friend. She had taken care of two people at one time, her husband and her mother. And they both are experiencing dementia a little bit, Alzheimer's combination. Mm-hmm. And they're also experiencing hard of hearing, and different issues. And one having PTSD and one aging. So she got combinations in her home. And she had just reached a pretty low moment in her life. And she said she had went to the library. She went online. She was looking for information that could help her. And I told her about your books, and she couldn't believe you had so much information. She was so thankful.
Well, thank you for doing that. And internet connection is unreliable.
Yeah.
Oh, I don't know whether you saw that.
Yeah.
My internet has gone out today about 5 times. So
do the best we can at all times for what we have.
Yeah. Well, you are a busy writer too. The two books, and So I think you understand a lot of the things that I say and my perspective.
Right. And I like the way you can be so.
Writers are connected, all writers.
I like the way you can be so gentle, but yet you can also make people be accountable to their choices in life. You're good at that too.
You have to know what we do.
Right. And like you said, you have to take care of yourself, and you have such a sense of humor in dealing with your situation. Like one of the things I thought was really kind of cute when you were saying how, being a caregiver, the physical activity that you do, like lifting and carrying and, walking, it was almost like it was your workout for the day. You looked at it like a physical opportunity to be healthy instead of looking at it something that's going to drain you.
She said to me, boy, I built up those flex just from lifting him.
Okay, could you say that again?
She lifted her husband so many times, like in bed, getting him in bed and helping him, that she built up the strength in her arms and developed muscles in her upper arms.
Yeah,
so
it's like you
worked out for her. Yeah.
You have to really pull the positives. That's one thing you said. And you also emphasized that there's no such thing as a perfect caregiver. You just do the best you can.
Yeah, right. And you have to get your exercise when you can. I read an article about going to the grocery store and walking up and down each aisle 3 times while you're there. So I thought, okay, that's my exercise. So I kept wheeling my cart and up and down, up and down. And one of the staff finally looked at me, and they thought that I was demented. And finally said, can I help you? And I said, no, this is my daily exercise. And she just laughed.
It's just beautiful to see how supportive you are for people that got put in your life, and you handle it with such a gentle spirit. It's phenomenal.
Well, I've received many gifts in return.
Yes, I say one thing I can say, if the day should ever come that a caregiver have to come into your life, you didn't pay it forward so many times. You probably have too many. You have too many. And what are some of the things, because you make several points that's important to you that people should understand about caregiving. Would you share a couple of those points with us?
I think it's important, even though you know a caregiver's story. My friends know my story. They know I've cared for 3 generations of family members, but I do not see them very often. I'm pretty much at home, and that's why I'm writing. Writing is my self-care, and writing for websites is my self-care. But what happens is that people then leave you out of invitations. They figure, well, she's not going to come anyway, so we won't bother to invite her to the coffee or whatever, and that has happened. Or it's very odd, but after our daughter died, people would see me in the grocery store and they felt compelled to tell me sad stories of their own. And now I appreciate the sadness that they had gone through, but I had plenty of my own sad stories. I didn't need any more. So even though you want to tell that story, please don't, because it doesn't make the caregiver feel any better. It doesn't make the bereaved feel any better. And all they want to hear are 3 words: I'm so sorry. That's all you need to say, and give them a hug. And be specific. So many people said to me, if you need anything, just call. Well, nobody calls. So what you need to do is say, I'm going grocery shopping tomorrow. Give me your list and I will shop for you. You need to be specific. Or I will pick you up for the 10 o'clock service at church. Be specific. And don't forget to laugh, because laughter can change your day. It is truly healing.
So basically, you also shared some of the things that you write to yourself, like you feel that affirmations are really, really a necessity. Affirmation a day, keep the blues away. I think that's what you said.
I did, yeah.
Why do you feel affirmations are so important?
Because they change your thinking. I teach workshops on affirmation writing, whether it's to recover from grief or to just give yourself a boost. So when you start writing affirmations, and I recommend one sentence only, this isn't an essay, one sentence, you can start with, I can write affirmations. That's number one. And then affirm the things that are going on in your life. And you may think that life isn't going very well, but hey, do you have a roof over your head? Okay, that's an affirmation. I have a roof over my head and I'm snug and dry, right? Do you have food to eat? I have enough food in the cupboard. That is an affirmation. And you change negative thoughts to positive thoughts. And the favorite affirmation of mine at the end of my affirmations book for caregivers is the one, caregiving is a journey and love is my guide.
You also say caregiving is a very spiritual experience too.
Yes, it is.
In what sense would you say that?
Well, it makes you appreciate life. I mean, my husband's surgery, the third operation, was 13 hours long and 4 surgeons. And the wound, as the surgeons called it, was massive. It started on his chest, went around his side, and went up his back. And it was so deep you could see his ribs. And only recently we learned that his heart stopped beating in the middle of that surgery, and he had to be resuscitated. And now when he goes for checkups, often the doctor is a little bit late. And they keep saying, he'll be coming any minute now. Yeah, here in 10 minutes. And one doctor was reading my husband's chart and looking at the photos of his wound. And he came in and he looked at my husband, John, and he just was astonished. And he said, John, it is a miracle you are alive. And it is. And we don't take it for granted.
Right, because you said people think that they have so much time and they don't realize that they're more closer towards this end than the earlier end in life.
True. And affirmation writing changes your day, and getting in touch with your spirit and faith changes your day as well. It changes everything about your life. So recently, both of us have been reading. I mean, that's one of my husband's primary pastimes. And we can sit here at home for hours, maybe not say a word, have a cup of coffee occasionally, and we are happy because it's a miracle.
Wow. I get that. So you wake up in a miraculous state every day.
I do.
Wow. And you share it with people. I mean, you're
well,
right.
And now there's some new research, and there is a physician at Mayo who has a wonderful approach to life, Dr. Amit Sood, S-O-O-D. And he says, when you wake up in the morning, before you have any thoughts, think about 5 people in your life that have helped you, and do this every day. So each day you're going to think of 5 different people. And pretty soon you will have an army of people who helped you along the way. And he says that will change your whole outlook on the day.
So would you basically say overall that you pretty balanced with your life at this given point in time? Would you say you're pretty balanced with your life?
I didn't hear a pretty what?
Balance.
I would say, yes, I would say as much as possible, considering all that has happened. I think it's my responsibility too, as a health and wellness writer, to do good research. So my books have extensive bibliographies. That's part of my work, and I make time for that. I make time for my quiet moments. Some days, every so often, I have a nothing day. And I say that I'm not going to do anything. I will give my husband the basic care. He's going to get good food and good attention. Other than that, I'm going to listen to music. I'm going to watch sappy programs on television. I'm going to read for fun, just read a silly novel, whatever it may be. And the nothing day can recharge me for weeks ahead. It's a good thing to do.
You take care of yourself too. You don't just take care of people. That's good that you know to do
right.
it. Because you also said that a bad day is usually a result of not having good rest most of the time.
That's true, and people may not realize that they aren't getting enough sleep. And so I research sleep and how to get a good night's sleep, and I follow those rules.
Wow, it's really been nice talking with you. Hey, you know what? You are on the Truth Will Set You Free show. Give us a truth to remember you by.
The truth is, life is a journey, and love is your guide.
Beautiful. And if people want to get in touch with you or purchase any of your books, how can they contact you?
They can go to my website, which is harriethodgson.com, and that's HODGSON. They can contact my publisher, which is Write Life, WRITE Life, one word. They can go to Amazon, and you can contact me via my website. There is a contact tab, and I will get back to you as soon as I can.
I really enjoyed talking with you, Harriet.
I enjoyed talking with you. Thank you.
And I pray continued blessings for you and your family.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you. You too.